we look at the past, I would hope we can get inspired by looking at the craftsmanship and looking at the details and long to build better because we see beautiful things like this. Now the guy it arrives with is Charles Bullfinch and Benjamin Latrobe. Latrobe actually does a lot of Greek revival stuff. And so we're going to talk about that next time. But these, both Greek revival and neoclassicism and federalism are neoclassical, right? They're both a discovery of what was really going on and them practicing these things. Now, you know, last time we talked, we were talking about how there really weren't architects in the Georgian period, that you didn't really have practicing architects. This is kind of the very first period of practicing professional architects. Now, they didn't make any money, but they were practicing professional architects. Now, I think Bullfinch represents that. He's a tragic figure, and he is the he's kind of an example of the whole architectural profession in the 1800s. He was extremely talented. He was flawed because he was a dreamer, I guess is the way I would say it. He had grand visions for design and for buildings and for other things, but he didn't have the experience or the savvy, okay, the business savvy to make it happen. Some of the things were stacked against him. The other reason we're going to spend a little time on him is because speculation was part of the building trade in this period. If you read this book on the building craftsmanship, it seems like, I think because the country was growing so fast, speculative building was the way a lot of people made money. And so it describes in this book a number of different builders who were, you know, buying houses, renting things, building things, hoping to buy rent, hoping to do things. Now this is during a period where you couldn't get a 10-year or 20-year loan. I mean, these were 1 to 3 year loans. And so what happens to Bullfinch is that the Jay Treaty, for any history nuts, it gets stalled in England so that trade kind of slows down, and he gets caught, unluckily, in a financial pinch, okay? Basically, well, we'll talk about it a little bit, but he is, anyway, it's kind of crazy. He builds 3 houses for this guy named Harrison Otis Gray, or Gray Otis. This guy was the classic developer, okay? He developed Beacon Hill, okay? Beacon Hill's like the most expensive place in Boston, maybe Back Bay or something like that. And Otis, or Harrison, saw what Bullfinch did with his developments, learned a bunch of lessons, and basically built his developments learning from Bullfinch's mistakes. Bullfinch, we talked about the original Faneuil Hall being a commercial building in the Georgian period. He's the one that redid Faneuil Hall and made it this, right? And so he did these commissions. He did the state building in Boston. He was the guy, okay? If you were going to build an important building in Boston, Bullfinch was your guy. But he didn't get paid anything, okay? The going trade in Europe at this time was for an architect to get 5% of construction costs, 2.5% for design, 2.5% for overseeing the construction. In comparison, good architects today get between 10 and 20%, right? Some of them might get a little less than that, but the top architects in America today can get, I know of a guy who gets 25% of construction costs. And so a lot more than these guys get. So the European model was 5%. Bullfinch over his career maybe got 1%, maybe less than 1%. He has this development called the Tontine Crescent, okay? Now basically what it was is his family had money, and they had real estate around in different places, and he had gone on a grand tour, and of course he was in Bath and he saw this, okay? I don't know if anybody been to Bath and seen this. It's the Crescent, the Royal Crescent. This is the circus here, and this is the Crescent. It's beautiful, right? It's huge. It's this wonderful collection of townhomes that all kind of look onto this lawn, and we believe that Bullfinch saw that and kind of came up with this design. and it was townhomes, which wasn't real common at that time, and it was this very, federal design that was very pretty. Basically, he kind of made every mistake you could make in a development, and took on all the debt himself, bought out his partners completely, had no room for, error, and then they didn't sell, right? So he finished the first half and none of them had sold. And so before even figuring out how to do this first half and getting straight with everybody, he started the other side. And so, and he owed builders all this money, and anyway, it's tragic. And so over a number of years, probably about 5 years, he lost everything. And he lost his parents' money too. I mean, his parents were invested in him, and they had to sell all their land to help him pay back everybody. He did. He was whole. He paid everybody back. But after this development, which was common to do, right? But the laws weren't set up to protect a developer, to protect investors. It was just if you owed money and your investors got impatient, they could call your note. And as soon as they called your note, everybody started calling your note, and you were kind of screwed. And so he kind of got screwed. And what's ironic is that Harrison learned, him and Harrison had grown up together, right? They weren't friends, but they certainly were acquaintances. And Harrison helped him settle all his debts. And part of him settling his debts was to sell his portion of Beacon Hill, which was about 20% stake. Now, they were calculating if he had held on to that for about 10 years, he would have been, bank, right? He would have just made all this money, but he didn't, and he couldn't, and he was forever poor. So for the next 15 years, right? It's a tragic story. Feel terrible for the guy, but for the next 15 years, he has to wait and get a job at the city, which is basically, it's a police job, but it was basically like a city inspector. And so he was getting paid $600 a year as a city inspector, which allowed them to live. He was getting between $100 and $200 a year in architectural fees. And so I think he averaged, they said, right at $100 a year in architectural fees. Luckily, in the 1815, he got hired to go to Washington and become the surveyor of works for the Capitol. He got paid $2,500 a year, but kind of a typical Bullfinch, the story I read, was that they offered him $4,500 a year, and somehow he worked himself down to only get $2,500 a year. I don't know what happened, but he just, wasn't a good businessman, right? Anyway, so he, supremely talented guy, right? He just was a wonderful designer, had great taste. Tragically, it wasn't the time to make it as an architect yet.